presenters. Willis Rosenfeld comes to us from Northern Virginia. He's worked as a professional accompanist and director throughout the DC metro area. Mr. Rosenfeld holds degrees and certificates from George Mason University, Regent University, and Messiah Universities, and is currently pursuing his Doctor of Musical Arts in choral conducting from George Mason. He also currently serves as the choral director at Loudoun County High School and director of music ministries at Sterling United Methodist Church. Daniel Jackson is the director of choral activities and music theory at Stonebridge High School in Loudoun County. Prior to coming to Virginia, Mr. Jackson taught in Massachusetts and in Florida for many years. His choirs have performed at multiple times for the Florida ACDA Music Educators Conferences, as well as the NAACP National Conference. Mr. Jackson received his bachelor and master's from Florida State University under the guidance of Dr. Andre Thomas, Dr. Judy Bowers, and Dr. Kevin Fenton. Please welcome Willis Rosenfeld and Daniel Jackson.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to hopefully I'm talking loud enough. It seems like the sound is bouncing in this room okay. If the people in the back can't hear me, just give me like a wave or something, and I'll get to talking loud again. So we're going to talk, like you gathered from the name of the session, about leading your choral library. I assure you this is not a phrase that I made up, though it was useful to be able to use it because I think it's kind of a catchy thing. But this is a concept that is familiar in regular library systems, that librarians use all the time, in the concept of occasionally you have to go through and get some stuff out of your library, right? So, and this came directly from the American Library Association website. Weeding or the deselection of material is critical to collection maintenance and involves the removal of resources from the collection. And standing here in front of you as a choir director, looking at a room full of choir directors, and you know that the majority of you are secretly hoarders when it comes. It's true, right? Like we get a piece of music, it's like, I know I've definitely stood in front of a piece of music time and time again, but like, yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and keep it. It's fine, right? So that's what we're talking about today, is how to kind of break ourselves from that thought process and some general guidelines towards a system you can kind of put in place for yourself to go through systematically and do that, and then also to talk about how to maybe identify some of those pieces that how do you look at a piece and go, well, what is the value of this piece? Is this something that's good for today? Is this something that's good for my students, right? So in that concept, right, we collect stuff every year. Most people, in most choral programs in the schools or wherever, you're buying new pieces. If you're like me, you're buying some new pieces, you're going into your library and doing some kind of a mix, depending on the year, depending on the students you have, right? So automatically, like we were saying, you're gathering stuff. In that context, it is important for us to review why we're doing things, right? If you've been teaching for more than a couple of years, there's probably your go-to pieces that are there. There's also probably some go-to habits that you don't even really catch yourself doing. Like, well, every time I have a group that does this, I do this song, right? And those are great things, and they're time savers, and they're good, but it's also good to occasionally kind of self-reflect and go, why am I doing this piece? Maybe there's a better piece to serve this function that I'm doing, and that could be a new piece, or it could be a piece that's deeper in the library. And then also, this is the important thing to me too, and this is the part where this gets kind of personal. Your library is a reflection of your program, right? What you have in your library, and in that context, I'm talking both about the physical library, and I'm talking about the library in your head of the material that you know, right? What you programmed in the past, what you are programming now, what you want to program in the future, those are all reflections ultimately of the program you want to put out there, and the things that you want your students to learn, and the things that you want them to see. So it's really important to review your habits, review what you have in your library. There's stuff in there that you don't need to have in there anymore. So that's kind of the why we're doing this. I'm going to pass it over to Daniel to kind of go deeper into this. Why is it important to really review these habits now? So,
thank you. So why now? Well, it's pretty obvious, I think, to all of us, especially in our current times, that we are growing more culturally and ethnically diverse day by day. And for us to grow, we have to come to certain understandings of not only who we were, but who we are, and what makes us who we are, and where we're going from there. Well, there was something that I wanted us all to consider. About 71 years ago, the state of Virginia didn't have a Virginia State history book. So they put together a committee or an assembly of people to come together to help to develop the Virginia State history book. Now, the history book was not written by somebody from Virginia. They had to find other writers to come in and write certain aspects of the book, and then the committee would inevitably go through it, review it, and try to alter or change things to match what they wanted to see as the Virginia spirit. The Virginia spirit. This was 71 years ago. I want you to consider that amount of time, 71 years. Within that book, they also wanted to make sure that that race was not an important role in the development of Virginia's history. So in other words, race, that includes the reason for the Civil War, was going to be dictated in a way, and I'm not going to use a certain word that I'm sure a lot of people would want me to use, but it was going to be dictated in a certain way to make sure that race was not going to be considered a particular role, or a strong role, or a significant role in the development of culture within the state of Virginia. 2011, one of those history books was found by a fourth grader. It was being used in her class. Her mother, who was from William and Mary, a professor at William and Mary, saw the book and saw that the book said something to the extent that African Americans in the state of Virginia willingly served in the Confederate Army during the Civil War. I personally have no real recollection of that, obviously. I've not done the complete background and research on that. What I do know is that when the writer was asked about where they got that source material from, the writer stood by it and said, I got it from the internet. This is 2011. This is 2011. Now, before then, about like in the 1970s or something like that, they were trying to take some of these books out of circulation because they found that many of the books were erroneous in their approach of dealing with cultural development and race relations within the Commonwealth. But in 2011, they were taking information from the internet, and from what the writer was saying, it was the Sons of the Confederacy that they were taking this information from and using to use as a standard curriculum for that particular class. That being said, I want to again reiterate, I am not saying in any way, shape, or form that this information may have been correct or incorrect. What I am saying is, though, what African American person during the time of the Civil War in the South was serving anything willingly if they were enslaved? Just that thought alone would make any person, a parent or a child, my 8-year-old has said this. Why would anybody not at least consider that this could be erroneous information? That being said, again, this information was being taught, or could have been taught, for the last 70 years. For the last 70 years. So that means if you were in the state of Virginia, if you were in this room within the last 70 years, it is quite possible that you or your children may have been taught this. Now, how does this play a role in the development? How is this important? Well, I wrote this down because I wanted to make sure I said this correctly. You cannot teach inclusivity while downplaying the unique cultural aspects that help define people's identities. So if in your mind, even an inkling in your mind is saying, well, I'm looking at this African American spiritual, and I'm trying to understand why this person is saying that I want to lay down my heavy load and go to heaven because the work or the stuff that I'm doing right now on this earth is too much to bear. Does it make sense to all of a sudden go back and say, well, in my textbook, they said, well, you know, we all got along. See, there's a dissonance in that. There's a dissonance in that. And it's highly likely that many of us may have been choosing music that, with that same dissonance, with that same cognitive dissonance in mind. How do you speak or teach your students what some of that music means if you yourself may not totally agree with what the music was coming from? That's very difficult. That's a very, very difficult thing to answer. And that's why, at this moment in time, we have to start reconsidering not only what we think, but how, like Mr. Rosenfeld was saying, how our music literature and our choral libraries reflect what we want to see in our community, reflect what we want to see from our students, reflect the type of inclusivity that we're trying to create, because there's no way around it, right? There's no way around it. Your programs or our state is going to grow more and more diverse. You're not going to keep us out. There's no changing it. There's more people coming. So what are you going to do? Do I keep going? Yes, it's right. So, educational expectations and priorities. Your first goal is to make sure that your music is based on performance. What are you going to be able to use in your library to perform? That includes music that you would consider to be world music or music from ethnic cultures or backgrounds that may be underrepresented even within your community or within your school. You have to be able to authentically perform it, not simply expose your students to it. We see this quite often. Let's be honest. There's probably a lot of us who, from time to time, still perform that African American spiritual at the end of the concert just because it's that fun song that everybody's going to get really excited for because they heard the soprano go up to a high C. Oh, that was great. Oh, yes! What were they talking about? I have no idea. But that soprano hit a high C, and it was awesome. And they started moving, and they were off beat, but it's okay. Weren't they just singing about nobody knows the trouble I see? Yes, they were, but you know what? That soprano hit a high C. Woo! It's about the authenticity of your performance, no matter what style of music that you're doing. If you want to expose your students to it, see, it's different than how most of us grew up. Like if you grew up in the 70s or 80s or something like that, we didn't really have the internet. So we couldn't just say, okay, well, let's pull up this song so that you can hear what the style is like. Let's pull up this from this particular culture. We couldn't do that. You can now. You can now. So if you wanted to expose your student to a particular, or your students to a particular style of music, there are multiple ways of doing it. Multiple ways. But if you're not going to perform a particular piece authentically, then you probably shouldn't do it. You probably shouldn't do it. We've already seen many instances where that occurs and somebody gets in trouble for it because it ends up offending somebody. So you probably shouldn't perform it, especially on an educational level, if you're not going to perform it authentically. That's the wrong page. Review the SOL standards, especially determining if certain music that you have in your library meets the needs for the standards that deal with cultural influences, community engagement, and ethical considerations. Just be very mindful of that. Be very mindful of that, because that'll help you govern how you decide what pieces, what particular pieces are comfortable for you to perform, and which ones you want to keep, and which ones you want to throw away. Like, for instance, I particularly, in the church choir that I used to work with, I completely wanted to throw away the song Shut the Door. Y'all heard it? Shut the door, keep out. It's like, oh, that's great. And then when you start to read about what the composer was really trying to do, it's like, we need to burn this. We need, well, sorry, that's my bias. That's my bias. Don't allow my bias to come through. It's my bias. I love that song. I'm sorry. But yes. 3, honesty, truth, culturally appropriate information. Try to find the style. Try to find music that is honest. Try to find music that is truthful. Try to find music that is culturally written with the idea that it is amplifying the idiosyncrasies and the culture of that particular style. Okay? Actually, Shut the Door is a great example. Shut the Door is a great example. Composer goes to a particular, I think he went to the Caribbean or something like that. I'm sure y'all have seen the video, right? Goes to the Caribbean, hears these people singing, and he's like, oh my gosh, and they were so, and blah, 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 and I just decided, you know what? And he says something about, like, sound, what was it? Being savage-like or something. And I just said, what do you mean savage? That doesn't make any sense. And why are we saying shut the door? He has no idea. He can't even explain it. He just says, listen, when you're trying to sing this song, you have to get this primal savage. Why? That makes no sense. Is it how they're saying the words? Because how they're saying the words are based on the phonemes that they were brought up with. That has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that they can't say shut the door. I'm sure they can, but that's not the phonemes that are comfortable for their dialect. So it has nothing to do with that. So he takes it and he uses it and he mass produces it and everybody buys it and they say, this is absolutely a great song because it gets us in touch with this particular culture. That was appropriation. That's called cultural appropriation. There was no honesty in what he was trying to do. There was no truth in what he was trying to do. He tried to make a profit off of another culture's beliefs and idiosyncrasies. That's cultural appropriation. So if there's a song like that in your music library, there's an easy way, or some easy ways of trying to basically figuring that out. Look at the front page. If it's a song that's from an underrepresented culture, written by a particular composer, a lot of times the composer is going to tell you exactly the way it should be sung or performed, or the reasons why these are. If you open it up and it's a blank page, there may be an issue there. I'm not saying that there is. I'm saying there may be an issue there. So just consider that. Not saying that you shouldn't do shut the door. I ain't doing shut the door. Shut the door on that a long time ago. But that's up to you. Your community may be completely different than mine. Representation. Does your choral library, okay, so raise your hand if you are a chorus director of a chorus program that is predominantly has students that consider themselves female. There may only be like a few that aren't, right? Would you say at least, raise your hand if it's at least 50%? Okay. So you're right, yeah. Come to find out that a gentleman named Fahad Siadat, who is a composer, conductor, arranger out west, did his own little research and found out that only 21% of the music curated by the National ACDA Repertoire Standards in 2019 was written by female composers. 21%, and you can already see that most of us probably have predominantly female students in our ensembles. That number doesn't quite add up to me. There seems like there's a cognitive dissonance there, right? So, how does your library look? Because truth be told, my library probably looks very similar to that too. I haven't done a ton of work with my library. My library is about 20 to 21 years old. And I'm getting better at it, but the truth is that my library is probably very similar to that. So when you're thinking about what possible stuff to bring in, or maybe even what possible stuff to keep, it may be something to consider when you're thinking about the composers themselves. Okay? Yeah, and then we'll skip that. Do you do performance style? Or is that me too?
We can just go.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. Okay, so a couple of things, performance and style. Exploring characteristics and cultural norms. If you are uncomfortable with a certain style of music, it's going to be very difficult for you to as an educator, teach it. Okay? So, yeah, there's going to be some wiggle room here. Some of you may feel more comfortable teaching that Filipino folk song than other people. And that's okay. You have to do what you feel most comfortable with. But selecting repertoire that the director is comfortable with is a part of the process. So select stuff that you are comfortable with. And determine styles and cultures that can be best represented by your students. That's a tough one because, again, we want to consider the idea that we want to expose students to the world. But again, we can expose them in many ways. Having them perform something that they may not really be able to connect with, that just may not work. Like I had a song in my music library that was saying, I think it was saying, country music is the music of America. I think country music is actually pretty cool. Is it the music of America? I don't know. Most of my students, when I take a poll, don't like country music. Maybe not the best song to do for them right now. You know? So you have to ask yourself those questions as well. And I think the source of stuff will stay for that.
So, that's kind of the general, why are we here? Why are we having this conversation, right? Let's kind of dig into those. These are just some general considerations as you start this process going through your library that I want to keep in mind. One, and actually, I want to start with this one here. Don't be too sentimental. This is hard for me. I'm sure it's hard for many of us. And then it kind of goes back to that hoarding thing I was talking about before, right? It's like, oh, I remember doing this piece, and I remember that the students in whatever year that was really loved this piece, and I have this great memory of it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you should still be holding on to that piece. And these are kind of connected to these two here are really connected. Don't be too sentimental, but also weeding doesn't negate the value of the piece. And we're going to talk about some examples here where just because you've decided that for your library this piece isn't appropriate does not mean that that is a worthless piece of music, that it isn't valuable to somebody. The idea is that you are guiding that library to your community, your program, your people, right? So these are important things to keep in mind, that you kind of have to remove yourself from the process, right? Taste is not universal. Some people like blank, but I don't, right? The example that I would give on that is that I know many people program Pink Zebra. I've never done a Peak Zebra piece. Like, I've heard that people love them, I've never really been able to get into it, right? That doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna remove it from your library, but you kind of have to weigh those things, right? You don't want to make your library 100% about you. Because if something happens to you and somebody walks in behind you, you're gonna want them to have a solid library to use that isn't just all about your personal taste, right? And that goes with this, potential for future performance. Will I do this piece again? Would somebody else do this piece, right? Those are important questions to ask. That goes to the sentimental thing too. Educational value, we talked about that a little bit, right? Is this something that teaches my kids something, or is this fluff? There's a place for fluff. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with fluff. Sometimes we need that piece that everybody just likes to sing, right? And also just the bare minimum of, do I actually have room to keep this piece? Right? I'm sure some of us in here have amazingly huge choral libraries that they can fill all kinds of space forever. I don't. I have a room that I have cleared out probably 40 to 50 pieces 3 times in the time that I've been in my library, and I still am like, I don't know where I'm going to put the new music this year. So that was kind of the inspiration for doing this, was that particular issue. So along those lines, some examples of times to purge stuff out. One of the schools in our county, Loudoun Valley High School, when their new director arrived, she kind of looked around at the collection that was there and was like, I have a ton of amazing stuff here, but like 3/4 of it is collegiate level stuff. There was motets and Bach pieces and full cantatas and full choral, great big large choral works that she's never going to program with a high school student. And I won't get into the history of why. I know why, because the previous director was into that stuff and had outside things and used their location to store some of that stuff, right? But she doesn't need to keep that stuff there on site. So she went through, cataloged the stuff, sent it out to her contacts, said, hey, if you want this material, it's here for you. And I know that a bunch of, I took some of them because I also hoard. I've got way too many copies of the Brahms Requiem now. But that is an example, right? Those are great pieces of music. Like, you don't need to, they're not trash, but there's no purpose for it serving in her high school library to have this stuff that really only collegiate groups are gonna do, right? That's the kind of stuff we're talking about. My own library, Loudoun County High School, was the first high school in Loudoun County, opened in '54. There are pieces in there that are stamped 1954, so I know that it goes back that far. But also, that's decades of different conductors and different styles of music that have been popular and different all that kind of stuff that I've just been slowly going through. And also, my feeder middle school, Simpson Middle School, I've taught there previously, and when I got there, there was 15 or 16 file cabinets filled with music at various sizes. That's a space consideration, right? Again, we don't necessarily need all this stuff. So this is one of the reasons that I know that I hold on to things. What if this piece is rare? What if this piece is out of print? And the answer is, well, I mean, the same issues that you would be addressing otherwise, right? Sometimes things go out of print because they should go out of print, right? Sometimes things go out of print because nobody bought that voicing. It's still available in SATB, but this is an SSA, right? You kind of have to use it on a case-by-case basis. If you're not sure, keep it. If you're like, nah, I don't think anybody should have this, then maybe keep a copy of it or do something with it where you can kind of archive a couple of them, but get rid of them otherwise, right? Don't let the fact that it might be out of print, that it might be old, keep you from getting it out of your library if it should be out of your library. And kind of going back to what I was talking about before, what do we do with it all, right? You do not have to just put it in the trash, though there are some pieces that are going to go straight to that great choral library in the sky, right? They're like, this piece, nope, this one's done, nobody's ever going to do this one again. Make a list of it, share it with your friends, send those things out, but don't be afraid if you get no responses. Like the last time I did a purge, like I said, I had 40 pieces on there, I sent it out to everybody, and I think one piece somebody wanted. That was it. And that was a pretty big list of people that I sent it to. right? So that's a sign, right? If you send out a list of music to people and they're like, nah, I don't need that, I don't need any of that, that's probably a sign that you made the right call on those pieces. Because if nobody else wanted it, why do you need to keep it? Right? How's our time? I don't know what time it is.
It's over 17.
17. Okay, awesome. Awesome. That's better than I thought it was. All right. You want to talk about the kind of 4 goals?
Okay, so 4 goals. Goals. Represent a range of styles, and that could be, any range of styles. It could be up-tempo, ballads, as it's saying right here, mid-tempo chambers. Represent a range of eras. Now, I wanted to stop there because there's a lot of times when you're going through your music, there's a hole in some of the eras as it pertains to, again, I'm going to be that person, when it comes to a diversity of the composers that you see. We may have, like for instance, I may have a lot of Renaissance music, but very few Renaissance music from female composers. Same thing with classical, same thing with Baroque, same thing with contemporary, things like that. So consider the idea that what you're trying, if you're thinking about diversifying, or because you've just sent a whole bunch of things to choir library heaven, and now you need to fill it with stuff, consider the idea that you can now start to diversify your offering. And with that, I'm going to stop for a brief moment and give a quick shout out to Dr. Meredith Bowen, who is having an interest session on expanding the canon of works by female composers. I wanted to say that if you get a chance, it's this Saturday. What time? 11:45. Please try to get out to it. A lot of the research that I did on literature, I ended up finding, and then when I doubled back and looked at her, because she sent me her list and her literature, a lot of the same composers, because I was about to mention all of them. Instead, what I'm going to do is say, go to her interest session, because she's much better at it than I am, and it's much more expansive. So just consider that, okay? Represent a range of origins and areas. Be mindful of this as well, because one of the things that I remember about my grad school work was that there was this particular, we were going through a reading session, sort of, during one of the classes, and we did the piece Dana Se, which is Ghanaian, and we started reading through it, and one of my colleagues said, "But Doc," I'm not going to say which doc it was, "But Doc, would we really be singing this in Ghana?" And Doc said, "Well, what do you mean?" He said, "Well, it's Christian. Would Christians be singing something from Ghana? I mean, why wouldn't we be singing something that's more them?" And Doc gave him this look. And it's that look that makes everybody say, "Oh, time to go." But Doc was very nice and said, "Son, you must remember that even in Africa, there is a strong Christian belief system there. Matter of fact, Africa is one of the first, many of the African countries were some of the first countries that adopted Christianity during the time of the spread of Christianity. So, frankly, Christianity in many of the places in Africa is older than Christianity here. So yeah, they would." And then I looked at him like, "You should have shut up." So be mindful of that. Don't just purge something because you believe, well, this doesn't really reflect the culture. Do your research first. Represent a range of composers. He put up some great composers here. Just to add to some, a couple of places where you could possibly find some composers of other backgrounds other than what we normally consider to be canon. Vocal Lessons, the group in Minnesota, has a wonderful database of choral selections that were commissioned by Latin composers. And this is 21st century Latin composers. They are amazing works, so take a look at that. If you have any interest, you can email me and I can send you the link, but it's literally just look up Vocal Lessons. It's all one word, VOCALESS, you know the thing. Directed by Philip Brunel, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Great guy. And of course, I'm sure you've all heard of Dr. Garrett's The Non-Idiomatic Choral Music of Black Composers. And there's many more. Again, Dr. Bowen is a great resource here in our state. Look her up. I'm sure she'll be willing to help you in any way, shape, or form. Yeah.
Tag. All right, so let's get into just kind of the general process of how you would go through your library, right? First up, note the obvious first. And that seems like such a basic thing to put on this list, but even just how many times if you have like a list electronically of your things, how many times have you looked through your list and immediately in your head gone, nope, 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 as soon as you look at that title? Like you don't, and that's in your library. That's in your library, right? So identify those songs first. And the first thing that's on my list is old pop song arrangements. I'm not anti-pop song by any means, but there was my favorite example of this is in the library at County, there was an SSA arrangement of a Barry White song, Can't Get Enough of Your Love.
Yes.
This existed. This exists. It's a thing that somebody made, right? So, and not to say that women can't sing lower voices, but that's, I'm never going to program that again. I never programmed it. I'm not going to do it now. I doubt anybody in the future is going to pull that one out, right? And that's the thing about some of these, I think many of us have done that song that you picked because your kids were really into that song that was on the radio or that was from that musical or whatever. The musical theater is a different thing with that, right? But some of those songs you want to hold on to because you might keep them, and in 10 years you'll look back and go, oh yeah, that's still a popular song that people do. And 10 years from now, some of those songs you're going to look at and go, nope, nobody has even thought about that song since we did it in that concert, right? Those things are obvious. Those things can go first. Also, event-specific compositions, though this doesn't happen as much anymore, but I did, in one of my purges a year or so ago, remove the Hands Across America theme. So, and a couple people were like, oh yeah, that, right? Yeah, they wrote a choral piece that was like the official theme for that event in like 1987 or whenever that took place, right? We probably don't need to keep that in the library now. I don't think anybody's doing that again anytime soon, right? Toss the singletons. I know, but if you, and I say that telling you that right now in my library there is like a whole shelf that's just filled with singletons. So I'm not judging if you can't do that. But occasionally, make it a habit to just occasionally go in and grab a stack of those, play through them one more time, and then toss whatever you're not interested in, right? Because you come to one of these once a year or so, singletons collect over time, right? Deteriorating condition, for my, especially the stuff that's in there from like the 60s and 70s, those papers are looking mighty yellowed and frayed now. Right? And it's possible that kind of goes back to the rarities thing, right? That piece might not exist anymore. You might not be able to get that piece, and maybe you hold on to it if it's still holding on by a thread. But if it's in current print, maybe buy some new copies and let that composer have another round of royalties off of that, right? And illegal photocopies, right? I don't think I have to really go into detail on that. If it wasn't a legal copy to begin with, you probably shouldn't keep it in your library, right? So, also, look for dated or trendy material. The style of choral music that was really popular to write in the late 80s and early 90s is very different than what we're doing now, right? We can kind of all agree to that. Whether you were a director in that period of time or whether you were a student coming up in that period of time. Some of that stuff is worth holding on to. You want to keep some of it because it's not like it's all bad stuff. But stylistically, we may not be programming our concerts with the same kind of concepts in mind, right? The types of things that we want in our concerts. When you look at things like choral assessment, the things that your peers are all programming for choral assessment isn't necessarily a whole bunch of stuff that sounds like that stuff did, right? That's the kind of stylistic change I'm talking about here. Identify that stuff. If there's something in that mix that isn't really being done anymore, you don't need to hold on to that. And pop culture specific things. My favorite example of this is that I found an arrangement of answering machine messages for choir. They were just novelty things that you could do for answering machines. And some of the people in here are young enough to not even know what that is at this point, right? You don't need to hold on to that, those novelty things, right? So consider the new norms. We've touched on a number of those. These concepts are not mutually exclusive that I'm going to talk about here, right? Something can be 3 of these, something can be 1 of these, and still not necessarily be something you want to hold on to, right? Is it inclusive? Does it use inclusive language? Is it offensive? Is it historically important? Is the piece appropriate to the abilities, right? That goes back to the collegiate level stuff that I was talking about earlier. The offensive piece, my favorite example of that, is a piece that was in the library at County called the Jingle Bells Travelogue, which was an arrangement. It was like a theme and variations of Jingle Bells, with each country having its own stylistic version of that song, including some interesting lyrical changes to make that work. Super offensive versions of the lyrics, basically. And I think it was, copyright 1962 or so, right? I talk about that because I find it amazing that something so offensive was in the library, but those types of things just need to go. Like, there's no historical value to that. There's no any value to that. That is a picture of what was something that was culturally acceptable in one period of time that is no longer culturally acceptable in this time, right? And if you've got a library that's older that goes back that far, it's really likely, unless you've already done this, that you have pieces like that in there, right? That's the exact type of stuff we're talking about. Is the piece inclusive? And that's a little harder to make tangible. Do people feel like this welcomes everybody that's going to sing it, or does it talk about things in a way that makes people feel excluded in some way? And one of the things that I meant to say kind of at the beginning that I want to say now, all of these things are personal to you. We're all going to go back to our own communities when we're done here, and what kinds of things are happening in your school. What kinds of things are happening in your community. We've intentionally been kind of vague about a lot of this stuff because it just comes down to your program and what's happening in your school. And you have to make the right decisions that work for the people in your community, right? And that work for you as a person, right? Some people are going to want to be stricter about certain things and want to be more open about certain things, and those are ultimately individual choices that we make as directors, right? So what counts as offensive, what counts as inclusive? There are some things that are really obvious choices in that. On other things, you need to make a judgment call for your program and for you. So just kind of putting that out there. Is the piece historically important? This piece by a piece by Mozart and Beethoven and the kind of the biggie great names, right? There may be a value to keep that piece unless you've got 50 of them, and this one doesn't really serve any educational value, right? So those are just some general concepts to cover on that. And I'm going to ask Daniel to talk about a couple of other specific situations.
Going back to something that he was saying, I wanted to bring up, do you remember the song Maegrito? You remember that one tag between the chorus section and the A section where it goes, Y si negro no se duerme, viene diablo blanco y zas, le come la pati. You remember that? Okay. Did you understand, well, you probably didn't because I'm awful at Spanish, but did you understand what I just said? There was a part in it that literally referred to the boss or master of the plantation as being the white devil. Okay? I performed that piece a couple of years ago. And I thought about it, as you were saying, like we're attached to a particular piece. We performed it in college. I had no issue with it. 2019, I actually had a problem with it a little bit because it wasn't really reflective of what's going on right now. So I had to consider, and I actually had the conversation with my students. I had to consider the historical authenticity of what they were saying, because if you know anything about the song, basically is a woman who's working on a plantation, and she has, they're in South America. Obviously, they're darker skinned Latin people, and she's basically singing him a lullaby, and this is a part of the lullaby. I'm trying to get him to sleep because she's tired. She's been working all day, and she's very tired. He needs to go to sleep. As a parent, we've all been there. But the historical significance of it made sense to me. But was it worth saying that for that particular community? Most of my students didn't have a problem with it. And I have, as she said, I'm from Stonebridge High School, predominantly white American students. They didn't really have a problem with it. They understood the historical fact to it. But we also tried to think of different ways of explaining it. Maybe they're just referring to the devil as a white devil because some people consider the devil to be white. I mean, that was a tough one. That was a tough one to swallow. So, the question was, do we keep it or do we change it? Most of them were relatively okay keeping it. I changed it. I made it rojo because most, fictional characterizations of the devil are red. So that's what I made it as. But then I thought, I don't know if I'm going to do this piece again. I don't really see the purpose in it at this point. Frankly, I probably did it because I was emotionally connected to it. So it's gone from my library. And it did hurt because I still love the piece. It has these pretty chords in it, and it's really nice. And with the exception of that one point, it makes great music. But there's other music that's like that. Coleridge Taylor wrote this particular piece using Henry Wadsworth's, one of Henry Wadsworth's poems. And if you don't know about Coleridge Taylor, he's a black British composer, or he was. And he is in one of those non-idiomatic modes of black composer composition. Did some amazing stuff. Takes this piece, and Henry Wadsworth is basically considered to be anti-slavery, but he uses the term Negro to refer to the main character of this particular, or in this particular song. Do you program it? It's a great song. The term wasn't, when I read through the text, I can't tell you, I was looking for it again, I can't tell you exactly what it was. When I read through the text, it doesn't feel like he was using the term Negro in a negative connotation, but the term Negro normally has a negative connotation. So do you program it or not? Is it something that you keep in your library or is it not? Those are the types of things that you'll have to ask yourself, because sometimes it may not be an entire segment of the song. It may not be the entire mood of the song. It may be one phrase. One phrase, and that one phrase will get you in trouble. And we've all seen it. It's like, but it's just one phrase. Matter of fact, I remember I did a piece for a graduation that had the name Jesus in it. Oh, it was Hold On. It was a spiritual. Just keep your, I thought it was perfect for seniors graduating. Keep your hand on the plow and keep moving. It's great. Then it says, if you want to get to heaven, let me tell you how, and all that type of stuff. Nobody had a problem with it. One woman had a problem with the word Jesus in it. or with the name Jesus in it. One person. So I said, okay, I'm going to take it out. Song should be fine. Took it out. Somebody had a problem with the fact that the song was basically a Christian song. Can't win if you're trying. You still do the song, but it was one phrase. Just one phrase can change everything. So, minstrel songs. I've been working on the railroad. You know it? It's a great song, right? People started singing in the chair like, used to love the song until I looked it up. Used to love it. I actually thought when they said Dinah, blow your horn, I thought they were talking about the train when I was a kid. Didn't know Dinah was the cook, blowing the horn to let people know, stop working on the railroad, it's time to eat. It's a part of the levee song. Heard of that one? Want to give you a couple of, give you like the last verse of it. So this is after Dinah, blow your horn. Sing a song, oh the city, roll that cotton bell. Roll that cotton bale. N-word ain't half so happy as when he's out of jail. Norfolk for its oyster shells, Boston for its beans, Charleston for its rice and corn, but for N-words, New Orleans. He was just saying a lot of the music that you are going to do, a lot of the music that you're going to do is going to, it's up to you and you alone to determine what's fitting for you and your community. If any music that you choose has to degrade another people so that you can find entertainment and fulfillment within it, I'm going to just be straight up with you. Don't do it. And I don't know every minstrel song, so I don't know what every minstrel song sounds like. But I know that the characterizations that were utilized in most minstrel songs are degrading to a culture. Don't do it. It's that simple. If you find it in your library, put them out. They don't need to be there. Now, some states have already started doing that. Massachusetts, Michigan, they're taking them away. This is also kind of hard to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. There are certain American folk songs that we just sort of accepted. Just because we accepted them, we didn't really look further into their origin. And I'm just going to be honest from my experience. Okay, from my experience. Sometimes when I hear certain folk songs that we normally use, and it has even the same feel of certain minstrel songs, I immediately take a step back and start looking it up. Immediately. It's kind of like, and you've probably heard, I hope you have, you've probably heard some of your friends speak about this, how there are certain people who will not move into a particular neighborhood because they're not quite sure if they will feel comfortable in that neighborhood. So they do their research about that neighborhood before they actually move them and their family in it, just because the neighborhood feels like it has a certain connotation to it. Like even if a neighborhood has the word plantation on it, I step back. I'm not even lying to you. And that's probably that's my fault, that's probably a part of my church. It has absolutely nothing to do with the people in it. But I immediately do my research. Doesn't mean that I won't move into it. They got great houses and it's good people. Shoot, I'm going in it. And if it's affordable, which nothing in Virginia is. but at least for a teacher. So but if I find out more, I'm gonna do my research. Some people won't even think about it. It's like, oh, this looks great, this is perfect, boom, boom. But for me, I have to do that. And for many other people, they have to do that. I do the same thing with a lot of the music that we have. I have to take a step back and say, what's this really about? What's going on here? Why are they using this dialect and phonemes? Why are they not using this dialect and phoneme? I'm sure some of you have looked at some African American spirituals and then all of a sudden see that they're written in perfect English. Like, why is that? That doesn't make any sense. I mean, because we all know the spiritual, so why is it that all of a sudden we're putting the ing on words that don't normally have ing on them? Well, it's because somebody wanted it to connect with their community. Like, okay, but why couldn't it connect with their community in its natural, authentic manner? Well, they won't connect with that. Well, that's a problem, because that means that somebody is taking that music and saying, well, I need to mass produce this and make money off of it, so I'm going to take this and use this and put it in a way that allows everybody to be able to digest it. Be careful of that. Minstrel songs did the same thing. I've Been Working on the Railroad did that. So just be careful of that, okay? Sacred music. We've already kind of spoken about sacred music. Virginia state standards let me rephrase that. ACDA and NAFME both agree that sacred music is an important part to the music educational curriculum. ACDA puts a little caveat in it too, though. What they say is that, but you should try to be relatively diverse in your offerings of sacred music. So if you can find a piece that's religious but not Christian based, that would be great too. But again, you have to know your community. Your community may not even care, so don't worry about it. Okay?
I think that's like right at our time, right? Okay. Thank you all so much for coming today. We were really excited to share this stuff with you. If you have any questions or want to have any further conversation, we'll be up here. Otherwise, have a great rest of your conference.
On behalf of VMEA and VCDA, I'd like to present these certificates to Willis and Daniel. Certificate of participation and recognition of your contributions as a presenter at the 2021 VMEA Professional Development Conference. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.